everyone, and welcome to WDIM News, my weekly podcast where I talk about sci-fi stuff and some other stuff. My name is Eric. Thank you very much for joining me today. Not a ton of stuff going on this past week, as there is still a writer's strike going on, and it was a holiday week. But there was another very good episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds released, titled Among the Lotus Eaters, which gave the series the chance to, in effect, create a sequel story, which is something this prequel series does not get a lot of chances to do. After I review the episode and break down all the Easter eggs, I also want to discuss some updates with the now canceled series Star Trek Prodigy and where you can watch it, as well as what Star Trek has planned for this year's Comic-Con in San Diego, which happens later this month. I'm also going to share with you some really promising data about Star Trek Strange New Worlds and how the series may finally be getting the amount of popularity us fans feel that it deserves. Then I will end the video with a bit of a personal update for those of you that are interested about a really interesting development in my life. But before I get into all this, I want to thank you for joining me and remind you to smash the like button, and if you're not yet subscribed, please hit that subscribe button as well. This podcast is now on Spotify and iTunes, so if you are listening to me on one of those platforms, please help me out by sharing or rating the podcast there. So now let's talk about the fourth episode of the second season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, an episode titled Among the Lotus Eaters. This was another good episode in my opinion. I know I kind of sound like a broken record at this point, or like a fanboy, but I really just think this is a good show. I think that this has transcended being just a good Star Trek series, and it's just a good show. I'm going to talk about a lot of things in the breakdown as well as in the Easter eggs about things that I like. A lot of times with these sci-fi shows, you have to be like a total fanboy or just totally into that fandom to be into the series, and you can't even talk about it with your friends because they're not going to be able to relate. But this series, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, I think is not like that. I think it's just a good series. I mean, this episode does have a message at the end. They don't beat you over the head with it, but it is just good. I mean, it's funny. There are aspects of horror in it. There's a lot of good stuff that we've seen from the first episode to this now the 14th episode. And I think that just this catalog alone is really, really strong. And like I mentioned, I'm going to talk about how it does look like the popularity of Star Trek Strange New Worlds is growing, but I just hope that it grows more and more, and episodes like this will allow it to, because of course the last episode of Strange New Worlds titled Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow was really good, but it relied heavily on fans really being into the time travel aspect of Star Trek. You know, it really pulled on those heartstrings of, you know, the movies and the episodes where Star Trek crews have gone back in time and, you know, changed certain things. But this one right here, I mean, it is a very sci-fi episode. They go to an alien planet and, you know, there's weird stuff going on and people are forgetting their memories. But a lot of it, you know, could be like Twilight Zone style horror and stuff like that, with people not knowing where they are or who they are. I'm pretty sure there was an episode, at least one, of Twilight Zone that had to do with that. So it's, like I said, it's just a good series that tackles real issues and has, you know, sequences that aren't just out there that you have to be a Star Trek fan to enjoy. I think if you just enjoy good TV, then you should be able to enjoy Strange New Worlds, and this episode is another example of that. But one thing I thought that was interesting about this episode is that it acts as a sequel to another episode, the first episode of Star Trek that was ever filmed, titled The Cage, which again, I'm going to get into that more in breakdown and Easter eggs, but usually on Strange New Worlds, we get a lot of prequel stories, like this happened before this, and, you know, this led up to this. You know, we've gotten that with Spock a lot, with his past, and with Pike. But now with this episode, we get a sequel. We get the continuation of something that happened in a story. And you wouldn't think that Strange New Worlds would be able to pull it off, given where they are in a timeline. But basically, this was just a little part of the plot line. It wasn't even a B plot or anything like that. And they were able to create a sequel story out of it. And I thought that was really smart. And it shows another way that the writers of the show really understand Star Trek and how to make, you know, a good Star Trek episode that fans will enjoy. And speaking of which, I think that the tone of this episode again shows that this series can do all kinds of the Star Trek trope. In the first episode of the season, we saw them steal the ship to save a crew member, which is something we've seen many times in episodes and movies. Then we got the courtroom drama episode in the second episode this season. Then we got the time travel episode that I just discussed. And now we got the crew is not themselves episode, which to me kind of reminded me of like The Naked Time from TOS or Genesis from TNG. There's a lot of episodes that I can reference. But it just shows once again that this series can do everything Star Trek. It can do the courtroom drama, then the time travel episode. It can change tone from week to week, and it's not jarring to the audience. I think even if you binge this season, you would still not feel like, whoa, this episode is way different from the one before. Like, is this still the same series? And you do get that a lot in other series, but I don't think you would feel that even if you binge this season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And we saw this also in the first season as well. So it's cool that they're able to keep this momentum going and showing that, they're not even done yet. There's more things that they can do, and that we'll see them during the series. I also liked about this episode that this was the first really Ortega-centric episode, and I think she did a fantastic job. I loved how in the beginning, she thought she was going to be a part of the away team, but that wasn't her place. She drives the ship, and that, of course, became the motif of the entire episode, which was really smart. As a character, I think she's just great because she represents the every person, the confident yet green kind of crew member. I mean, she definitely has experience. She's mentioned that she did serve in the war and stuff like that. But compared to the other officers on the bridge, she does seem a little green, and I think she's the lowest rank of any of them as well. So that makes sense. But I think that Melissa Navia does just a great job as the character, and she's done it from day one. She's very likable. She's probably one of the most likable characters on the show. She's also a lot different than the other characters. She seems to be a lot more optimistic than a lot of the other characters on the show. Even when they get into the thick of things, she seems to be confident and willing to, go the extra mile to get them out of it. They gave her the spotlight in this episode, and I thought she did a really good job. I think that this main cast doesn't really have any weak links, and they continue to show that by giving each actor the spotlight. Another thing that I liked about this episode is that it was another chance for these actors to play different versions of themselves. We've seen it a couple of times. We saw it in that really funny first season episode where they were all in a children's fairy tale, and they got to play really exaggerated versions of these characters, and now they've got to play, I guess, more vulnerable versions of their characters in this episode. And even like the basis of the episode, that the episode was about them holding on to who they really are. That really played out well in their performance. And I think, like I said, everybody did a really good job with what they were given in this episode. And more so than this episode, but it seems like this season seems to be about the Prime Directive and how what Starfleet does affects other cultures. In the first episode, we had a faction trying to restart the war between the Klingons and the Federation, which obviously devastated a lot of cultures besides just the Federation and the Klingons. The second episode of the season was about the Illyrians and, of course, how the Prime Directive affects that culture and other cultures that are affected by genetic engineering. The third episode of the season was about the Romulans trying to stop the creation of Starfleet and all, that they would have influence over once they were created. And this episode was more about cultural contamination and how, what we leave behind, what Starfleet left behind after they left this planet, and they thought they got all their people and they didn't get they were basically very sloppy when they left this planet. And that's the reason why we need the Prime Directive, so things like what happened in this episode don't happen. So I thought that was really smart as well. And back to kind of what I was saying about how this episode was a sequel story, it shows that the stories that we have seen in the pantheon of Star Trek history are not over, and that this series and maybe other series can fill in blanks that can be very interesting. Really for this episode, all they did was they added the forgetting plot line about, how they forgot who they were. I don't believe that was mentioned in the Cage or the Menagerie when they talked about this planet, but they just added that one aspect, the forgetting, and made the story really, really interesting and got to fill in some blanks and make basically a sequel story off something that happened in the pilot episode. So that's just really smart. I mean, that's just taking a crumb of information and making a whole episode, and not just some silly episode that just filled with member berries. It's an episode that has something to say, and it's compelling, and it makes sense, and you're not changing canon. Star Trek Strange New Worlds has a lot of possibilities. The fact that it is a prequel series, a lot of people thought when it was first announced would kind of hinder it. How much could this series do without bumping into the original series? And we're seeing that there is a lot of meat on this bone, that there is a lot of stuff that the writers and the producers of the series can get from what we know about Star Trek and make it that much better. And I really appreciate that. And I talked about this for a second, but I think that this episode does also have a message, but they don't beat you over the head with it. I think that Star Trek sometimes gets some bad press for being too woke or whatever that means. But nothing about this episode is woke, and I don't think you could really say much about Star Trek Strange New Worlds is woke, but they do have a message, but it's subtle, but yet not so subtle that the audience should be able to get it. It's not just forced in front of you and that you have to see it. So I thought that the message for this episode was that you can get lost in the noise of your life, but if you focus on who you really are, everything else will start to, refocus. And I think that was kind of the point of this episode, was saying that, a lot of people can get frustrated or overwhelmed by everything that's going on in their life, and it can beat them down and it can depress them, because when you see this room with everything that's messy, it's hard to just concentrate on the chair and clean up the chair first. Some people have difficulty doing that. I know I'm one of those people. And, this episode really kind of accentuated the point that if you just lose the noise and focus on who you really are, then, you'll be able to take just one step and two step instead of trying to run the whole race at once. So I thought that was really smart, and another way I really like this episode. But let me know, what did you think of this episode? Did you think that this was another good episode of Star Trek? Did you think that I'm wrong and that Star Trek has become too woke, or Strange New Worlds has become too woke with its message? I thought it was a really smart episode, a smart way to do a sequel to a prequel. I start to feel like I sound like a broken record now, because I keep saying in every episode, they're good. But I really, truly believe that. And I'm going to talk about some data here in a little bit that kind of backs up what I'm saying. But I'm glad to see this. For Star Trek to be able to really flourish, it has to be popular, not just with Star Trek fans. It has to be popular with the zeitgeist, with everyone out there. And to do that, I think it's smarter not to do a big splash. And the third season of Star Trek Picard was kind of a big splash. It was almost a movie. It was so epic. But once it's over, it's over. We have nothing more from Star Trek Picard. It doesn't look like they're going to pick up any of those characters that survived, because the draw of Star Trek Picard Season 3 was the returning characters from the Next Generation. And if they're not going to be involved in a new series, then you kind of lose that draw. So you have this big event, and yes, Star Trek got really popular for a second, but now you can't really build on that, because there's no Season 4 Picard, and there's no continuation for that storyline. With Strange New Worlds, I think they're not trying to make that big splash. They're not trying to make that movie. They're kind of trying to drip into whatever you want to call pop culture now, and kind of cross Star Trek Strange New Worlds over from being just a good Star Trek show, or even just a good sci-fi show, to a good show. Like The Mandalorian is a Star Wars show, of course, but it is so popular that, everybody talks about Baby Yoda, even though they might not be a Star Wars fan. So if Star Trek wants to get to that level of popularity, I think it's smarter to do it like this, with Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and just having good episodes, just punches and bunches, just every week it's going to be good. We're not trying to blow your hair back with crazy, like, time-altering, aspects of the plot line or anything like that. We're just going to do good episodes every week. And I really think that that's what Star Trek Strange New Worlds is doing. So let me know, do you agree with me about Star Trek Strange New Worlds? Or do you think that there's something they could change and you'd like to see something different in the future? Speaking of good videos, I did a video last week after my podcast about Khan and the history of Khan, back to his birth and the eugenic wars and all that. And I really hope that you can check it out if you haven't yet. I will put a link to it in the description, as well as in this video if you're watching it on YouTube. But after you listen to this podcast or watch this podcast, I hope you watch that, because it did take me a lot of work. I put a lot of love into it. And I think it's a really good video, but for some reason it's not very popular. So just check it out and let me know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not a good video, but let me know if you check that out and what you think. But I thought it was a really good video, and it really goes into the history of Khan, not just what he did on screen, but what characters have talked about and kind of his history. I hope that you can check out that video after you check out this podcast. So now let's cover all the Easter eggs I found in this fourth episode of the second season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, titled Among the Lotus Eaters. Of course, the title is taken from Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey. In the story, the lotus fruits and flowers contain a narcotic that basically makes the people on the island really stoned. People that came to the island and ate from the lotus flowers would never want to return to their own lives. So you can see the connection with the plot line of this episode to that epic poem from Homer. And that's not Homer Simpson. That's Greek mythology, in case you're wondering. Anyway, This episode, as I've mentioned a couple times, is a sequel to the pilot episode of Star Trek titled The Cage. Even though it was the first to be filmed, it did not air to the public until 1988. In that episode, the events that occurred on Rigel 7 were still very much in the mind of Captain Pike, and the Telosians on the planet even showed him a vision of Rigel 7 and the Kalar. Certain aspects of this episode are also very similar to the TOS episode titled The Paradise Syndrome, an episode that saw Captain Kirk lose his memory and begin a new life on an alien planet, which is interesting because Captain Kirk wasn't involved in this episode. Captain Battelle gifts Captain Pike an Opelian Mariner's Keystone. This would seem to be an allegory for the North Star, which always establishes the true North Star for a sailor as a way for them to return home. Again, you can see how this works with the plot line of this episode. Captain Battelle tells Pike that she got the Keystone on Galt, which in the future will be where Worf is taken to live by the Roshenkos, and it's supposed to be some kind of farming colony. Zach Nguyen was a personal yeoman to the captain, and he was succeeded by yeoman J.M. Colt on The Cage and Janice Rand on the original series. Interestingly, though, there is no mention of a yeoman on the current bridge of the Enterprise on Strange New Worlds. The events of The Cage occurred in 2254, and the events of this episode occur in 2260, meaning that the yeoman was there for 4 years. Pike mentions in this episode that Spock also got injured on the away mission to Rigel 7, and at the beginning of the episode, The Cage, Spock is walking with a limp to establish that he had been injured on the mission. Pike asked Dr. Mbenga to join the away team even though he is a doctor. This is due to the fact that Captain Pike knows that the good doctor is also proficient in hand-to-hand combat and they won't be able to use Federation weapons when they go. This is not only referencing Dr. Mbenga's time in the Klingon War, which, wouldn't that be a great anthology episode? I've talked before about how Star Trek needs an anthology series. Wouldn't it be great to just get one episode about Dr. Mbenga in the Klingon War and what happened to him? I'm just saying, Paramount, there's an idea right there for you that people would probably like, but anyway, I digress. As I was saying about Dr. Mbenga, he is played by Babs Alusa-Mokum, and in real life, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, so that is a very bad man that you don't want to mess with, and it's cool that he gets to use that on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I wonder if that's one of the reasons he got cast in the part. When Pike and the away team are captured, they are put in literal cages, which is probably a reference to the episode that precipitated the events of this one titled The Cage. At one point, Number One takes the controls from Ortegas, which references the fact that she was both the pilot and the first officer in the episode The Cage. Ortegas asks the computer to show her where to go, and the floor lights up, which is very similar to how Riker found his way around on his first day on the Enterprise D in the pilot episode of The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint. So I thought that was kind of cool how they brought in some aspect of the pilot episode of The Next Generation while basically just referencing the pilot episode of the original series over and over again in this episode. Dr. Mbenga and La'an repeat the same hand gesture under their eye after they regain their memories that they did in the pilot episode of Strange New Worlds. This may be a hint that these two have a long history of serving together, probably in the Klingon War. Again, wouldn't an anthology episode of this be great? But those are all the Easter eggs that I found in this episode. Again, the episode is kind of one big Easter egg because it's referencing that event on Rigel 7 so much. But these were all the Easter eggs that I found. But if I missed any, please let me know in the comments below. Okay, so now let's talk about those analytics I promised you, which I'm sure you're really excited for. I'm an analyst as like my real job. I'm an analyst, so I love data and analytics. So this is really interesting to me. If it's not interesting to you, just listen to the bullet points because this is good news about Star Trek. So if you're a Star Trek fan, this should interest you. But it was just released by a company called Patriot Analytics that they do a lot of the analytics for streaming services. It's really hard to get analytics for streaming services because most times they themselves don't release them. So you have to use these third parties like Patriot Analytics to get the real data. I believe that Patriot Analytics are kind of the standard for streaming data series. So during the week of June 10 through June 16th, and remember the first episode of the second season of Strange New Worlds was on the 15th of June, Star Trek Strange New Worlds was the 6th most in-demand original series of any original series. That is really good. If you are watching on YouTube, I have a chart of the other series that are on there, and those are all big names. And some of them, like Ted Lasso and Titans, those just went into their finales this year. So that's one of the reasons that they are so popular is because those shows ended, and they ended on a high note, which gained them some popularity. Paramount Plus's Star Trek Strange New Worlds had the biggest surge in demand after its second season premiered on June 15th. Although it's only one episode in, the second season looks promising for the show in terms of audience demand, which increased by 53% post-premiere, making it 33.4 times more in demand than the average series in the US for the week. So I know that's a lot of data right there, but that's really good. That means that it has gained a lot of popularity from the first season to the second season. And this is kind of what I was talking about before with Picard, where they got popular in their third season, but since there's no fourth season, there's nothing to build on. And here it seems like Strange New Worlds is building on the momentum of the first season. Again, this is only for the first episode. Each week, we'll start to learn more and more about the season. And I guess it just takes them this long to get the data compiled. And hopefully it shows Paramount that they need to produce more Star Trek content and definitely, green light future seasons of Strange New Worlds and continue with that as their flagship for the Star Trek brand under the Paramount Plus umbrella. But again, I think this is great news. Let me know what you think of this news. Do you think it means anything? I know that there's a writer strike going on right now, but this kind of information is momentum that Star Trek can build on. If not just with Paramount, it may help, Prodigy, them getting sold to another company. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But any good news from Star Trek Strange New Worlds is good for the brand. So this is definitely something that people should be talking about. I don't think a lot of people are because of, what's going on with the writer strike, but it's really good news and I love to see it. So let me know, do you care about data at all, or is this really boring to you, or do you want to hear any good news that has to do with Star Trek? Continuing on with Star Trek, now I want to talk about the Star Trek presence at Comic-Con 2023 this year. This information is coming from comicbook.com, and they say that Star Trek is beaming into Hall H once again for this year's San Diego Comic-Con. Paramount Plus will bring Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Star Trek Lower Decks, and Star Trek Discovery to the event for a Star Trek Universe panel that promises exclusive content from each of the shows. So since this is happening later this month, we're probably going to see some trailers, definitely one for Star Trek Lower Decks and probably one for Star Trek Discovery as well, that will tie in that it's the last season of the show. They did a trailer for the 5th season of Discovery already, but when that trailer was released, they didn't know it was going to be the final season. So I'm sure this new trailer will touch on that. The article continues, the panel happens on Saturday, July 22nd from 1:30 to 3 p.m. local time. Star Trek Strange New Worlds is in the midst of its second season on Paramount Plus and will also have a booth on the convention floor. Star Trek Lower Decks Season 4 will debut later this year. Star Trek Discovery will have its 5th and final season on Paramount Plus in 2024. With both Star Trek Strange New Worlds and Star Trek Lower Decks featured on the panel, perhaps fans will get to see footage from the upcoming Star Trek Strange New Worlds episode, guest starring characters from Star Trek Lower Decks. And I think if this lines up correctly, the episode that features both the cast of Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds may happen the next week. So this happens on Saturday. That next Thursday may line up with the 7th episode of the season. And that could mean that we'll see a trailer just for that episode during this panel. So that could be pretty cool. But it doesn't stop just there. Star Trek will also celebrate the 50th anniversary of Star Trek the Animated Series with a celebration panel on Friday, July 21st from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. The panel, run by the Star Trek brand team, promises to reveal the latest in publishing, gaming, and beyond with one-of-a-kind giveaways, exclusive sneak peeks, and special panelists, suggesting new books, comics, and merchandise tied to Star Trek the Animated Series could be revealed during the panel. So that's cool. A lot of people are into retro stuff. I know that the animated series was not very popular when it was first released, and I've tried to watch it. It's kind of hard to watch. It kind of has the Hanna-Barbera style animation, which is kind of freaky. Plus, it's like 4 actors voice all the characters. So that's kind of strange too. But it is a part of Star Trek history, and it is kind of interesting. It will be cool to see what they come up with for this panel. There'll probably be a lot of cool retro merchandise, and I'll probably snatch some of it up. Besides Star Trek, though, Babylon 5 will also have a presence at the San Diego Comic-Con, and I believe that they'll be showing a new trailer for their film, The Road Home. So that should be really cool as well. But the one thing that people are mainly talking about this year's Comic-Con is not the people that are going, but the people that are not going. And this is mostly due to complications with the writers and actors strike. And the following companies have already said that they're not going to show up at San Diego Comic-Con. Marvel, which is usually one of the biggest participants in Comic-Con, along with the rest of Disney, which is weird because Disney is actually sponsoring the event. So it's odd that they're not going to have an actual presence on the floor. DC Films, which are the new films that are going to be created by James Gunn, they will not have a presence this year at Comic-Con. And Universal and HBO or Max or whatever you want to call it, they will also not have a presence at Comic-Con. Very cool that Star Trek does have such a big presence. They're no doubt taking advantage of the fact that these big name companies won't be there. So Star Trek may be one of the series that most people are talking about. So this is a good move by Star Trek, and I'm excited to see what happens from it. But let me know, are you going to be going to Comic-Con? Do you follow it at all? And are you excited to see new trailers from Star Trek? And now the final thing I have about Star Trek is the future of Star Trek Prodigy. Now, a couple of things are going on that I want to talk about. For one, it was announced that the second part of season 1, so that'd be episodes 11 through 20, is set to be released on DVD and Blu-ray on September 26th. Now, I know this is a big deal for fans of the series because right now, you can't watch the series anywhere unless you have pirated it or something like that, but which I do not condone. But now it looks like if you have the first part of the first season on DVD already, you'll be able to complete that collection on September 26th. Also, there is a petition to save the series. I know we've talked a lot about the Star Trek Legacy petition, and now it looks like someone started one to save Star Trek Prodigy as well. At the time of recording this podcast, the petition has 24,000 signatures. I've talked about before about how I personally don't think these petitions do a lot to help a series. I think that they're more for the fans and so they can feel like they're trying to do something to help. And the best way for fans to help is to either buy stuff or watch stuff. So let me know in the comments, will you be buying the rest of season 1 of Star Trek Prodigy on September 26th? Do you want Prodigy to return? Or are you fine with it kind of just fading into the ether? And now my final bit of news doesn't have anything to do with Star Trek, but it does have something to do with sci-fi, and that is that the Fede Alvarez Alien movie has wrapped production. They have also set a release date for August 16th, 2024. This is big news. I've talked about this a couple of times on this channel. There are 2 Alien projects going on right now. One is reported to be in the Prometheus kind of storyline where it might be a sequel to the final movie in that, which was Covenant, or it might more be a prequel to the first Alien. I don't think they've really made clear about that, but this is a separate film that really is supposed to be a standalone story. So this is what the article says. First of all, the working title for this movie is Alien Romulus. That has nothing to do with the Romulans in Star Trek. This is not a Star Trek Alien crossover. But Alien Romulus is a standalone story that focuses on a group of young civilians in a distant colony. Knowing Alvarez's filmography, this may be a slasher, something that leans more into the horror aspect of the franchise. When this was first announced, it was announced on the heels of the popularity of the Predator prequel, Prey, that was released directly to Hulu. And it was thought that this film would kind of be the Alien version of Prey. It would be, stripped down and more like what I just said, the slasher aspect of the ethos of the franchise, and kind of more like the first Alien movie. So it looks like they are leaning into that. And the fact that it's a standalone story makes me think that this has to do with civilians that are not humans. If there are aliens out there that are xenomorphs, I think in the movie Aliens, they talked about finding other aliens on other planets that didn't look like xenomorphs. So we already know in this universe, there are other aliens besides humans and xenomorphs. Maybe this film will be about a group of other aliens, not xenomorphs, but young civilians that may look a lot like humans. Maybe they're like Bajorans or something where they have like ridged noses or something like that. But basically they're just humanoid civilians, and it doesn't tie to like the Yutani Corporation or Ripley or anything like that. It's just another story that has to do with xenomorphs on a distant colony. The cast is all made up of young actors who I don't really recognize. So that again makes me think that these are kind of disposable characters. Like we're going to see maybe them under heavy makeup or CGI or something like that. And they might not even look human. And again, the fact that it's a younger cast makes it more like a slasher film, like a Michael Myers, kind of babysitter style, slasher film. The director is definitely cut his teeth in horror. So I expect this to be more like the original Alien movie and not like Aliens. It'll be more Ridley Scott than James Cameron, in my opinion, and I'm really excited for it. I think it'll be really good. It is going to be released in theaters. At first, they were saying that it would be released directly to streaming, but apparently they're so happy with the way the film turned out that they are going to release it in theaters. So let me know in the comments, are you a fan of the Alien movies? Will you be going to see this movie once it's released on August 16th? Or have you not been a fan of the Alien movies? Do you think there's just too many and you just want to put the story down and move on to something else? Let me know in the comments. And then finally, I want to share just some personal news about what's going on with me. To those of you that care, I know with this podcast, I've gotten a lot closer with a lot of the viewers, and I really enjoy it. I really feel like there's a lot of cool people that like what I'm doing here and that we get to communicate and stuff like that. And I really enjoy it. So if you are a supporter of this channel, I really appreciate you and what you've allowed me to do with this channel. But specifically what I'm talking about is that I have decided to start another YouTube channel that has nothing to do with what I'm doing here, basically. And this will be a food and travel YouTube channel. Now, if you're wondering why the heck I'm doing this, I've just been gravitating towards fun things that make me happy. And especially if it's something that will make other people happy. And that was kind of my idea with the podcast. And so far that's worked out really well. So I'm kind of taking that into another part of my life. And now sharing, my love of food and places I go and stuff like that. So that channel will be a lot more personal. My fiance will be helping me with that channel. So this channel I do all by myself 24/7, but that channel my fiance will be helping. She won't be appearing on screen at first, but hopefully I can egg her on into doing that. But she'll be helping me with my Instagram and TikTok and mukbang, whatever the heck is popular this week. I don't know. I don't understand any of that stuff. So she'll be doing all of that. The channel will release its first videos in about 2 to 4 weeks. I'm actually going on vacation next week, so it's kind of a bad time to start some new work. But I did start filming a couple episodes, and the first few videos will be based on restaurants that were featured in the FX Hulu series, The Bear. So if you know anything about that series, there's an episode where Sydney, one of the characters, goes to visit a bunch of restaurants to get inspiration. So I thought it would be cool to visit those restaurants as well and order what she ordered and talk to the people she talked to. And it's really cool. I've already went to 2 places and I had a blast. So if just the first 2 videos that I worked on are anything to show me what's going to happen, I'm just super psyched what could happen with this channel. So if you are a fan of this channel, the one thing that you probably want to know and hear me say right now is that working on this new channel will not disrupt WDIM, the channel, or the podcast. Again, I just mentioned that my fiance is helping me, so I won't have to do everything on my own. So with that help, I should be able to create videos for both channels without really missing a beat. I live in Chicago, so there's a lot of places that I can go in Chicago, but it's also kind of easy for me to travel if I need to and take my family. Me and my family travel a lot, so we already have some ideas about stuff we want to do. So if you want to know more about me and my family and what I love outside of Star Trek and movie news and sci-fi, definitely check out this channel. I will update you guys once I have my first videos out, so you can subscribe and you can check it out. Just from a personal note, I am really excited to be doing it. I love food, and a million years ago when I was in college, I actually went to be a chef, and my first job was working in a French brasserie in the River North area of Chicago. And if you watch The Bear takes place in the River North area of Chicago. So there's a lot of similarities there. I really enjoyed the series too. And I'm very excited to be covering it like this. So let me know, are you excited for this new channel? Will you be watching it? Do you think I should just stick to sci-fi and not care about things that I like outside of it and just, do my WDIM content and keep with the Star Trek? Let me know in the comments below. I'd be really interested to hear your opinion on this new chapter in my life. Well, that's all I have this time. Thank you very much for joining me. Again, the best way to support me is to smash the like button right now and to also be subscribed so you check out my future videos. Speaking of my videos, I talked about that video about Khan's history that I really hope you can check out after this one. I'll leave a link to it in the end of the video as well as in the video description. Once again, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time on What Did I Miss?